Hi everybody, this is Bhanumurthy. I'm the chairperson for this third technical session on fiscal decentralization, local governments and the political budget cycles. This is the first joint collaboration between NIPFP and IIPF on public finance related research. So I would like to thank the organizers, especially Lekha Chakraborty, for putting this whole session and also giving me the opportunity to chair this session. So we have 4 papers. I can see all the 4 authors are there. Now we have 100 minutes total. So if all the paper presenters agree with me, paper presenters can have about 15 minutes. And then
switch on the video, sir. Please switch on the video.
Okay, don't worry. So for the discussants, we'll have 5 to 7 minutes, and any questions coming from the participants, then we'll have both the responses as well as participants' questions for 3 to 4 minutes. If that's okay, can we start with the first paper, Fiscal Consequences of Municipal Mergers by Dr. Lucia from University of Munich. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Yeah, so
yeah.
Yeah, so
okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I will try to share my screen, my slide. Can you see them now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So thank you very much. It's actually still without the PhD, so I'm still a PhD student at the IFO Institute in Munich. It's an economic research institute based in Munich. And today I'm going to present my single author paper, which deals with the fiscal consequences of municipal mergers. So the prime motivation for mergers at the local level is the realization of economies of scale. Larger jurisdictions should professionalize their administration and be able to offer local services at lower unit costs. However, the financial effects of a community merger are not only limited to the expenditure side, but can also influence revenues through fiscal equalization systems. And the reason for that is that some fiscal equalization systems, like the German one, but also the Austrian or the Czech one, grant disproportionately higher grants to larger municipalities. And this is done based on the argument that the production costs of public services are higher in larger municipalities. So basically an argument that runs counter to the prime motivation for municipal mergers. In this paper, I look at the consequences of mergers on fiscal equalization transfers. And the first part of the paper, which I won't be able to have time to present today, actually deals with whether fiscal equalization gains can also potentially incentivize voluntary mergers. So this is one part of the paper, and the second part deals with the revenue effects of large-scale merger reforms. That is looking at how fiscal equalization transfers are redistributed in the wake of merger reforms. And the empirical setting for this question is the German state of Saxony. It's an East German state. And after reunification, Saxony actually had large and encompassing merger waves. I will go into a bit more detail in a minute about that. The data I use is aggregated to post-reform boundaries as of 2019. And my sample covers roughly 419 municipalities over a time period between 1992 and 2010. I will also be brief, or I'll skip the related literature due to time constraints. Just let me say so much. So while at least theoretically certain size-related cost advantages can be assumed from mergers of municipalities, the empirical evidence that we have so far actually casts considerable doubt on this. Actually, only the work of Reingewirtz has found significant cost savings for merged Israeli municipalities. But let me first of all give you a bit of background, institutional background on the merger reform and then on fiscal equalization in Saxony. So at the beginning of the 1990s, so at the beginning of my sample period, the local government landscape in Saxony was very fragmented and small scaled. So the median municipality at that time had only 753 inhabitants. So it was really relatively small. So at the state level, at the Saxon state level, deliberations about administrative reform at the local level began very early on. And the goal was to create more effective and more efficient municipal structures. However, in the interest of the recently restored local self-government, the reform of municipal territory was to take place exclusively on a voluntary basis at the beginning. So the Saxon state government did not want to interfere at the beginning with the recently restored independence of the local level, so they wanted municipalities to merge voluntarily. And that was possible until 1998. So this was the voluntary phase. And in 1994, actually, the state ministry only published some basic principles and guidelines for the merger reforms. For example, they also committed to a minimum population size of 5,000 inhabitants, but municipalities could merge voluntarily. However, during this process, over these first couple of years, it became clear relatively quickly that not all the reform need could be met on a voluntary basis. And this is the reason why actually in 1999, the Saxon state Ministry of the Interior then concluded the territorial reform with a compulsory merger wave. So they actually they introduced a law, and municipalities based on this law had to merge. And after that, and even up until today, municipalities can actually merge still on a voluntary basis. But this was like these were the largest merger waves during the 1990s, as you can see in this graph. So the local level in Saxony was subject to many administrative changes. Over the course of 28 years that I show you here, the number of municipalities actually decreased by 74%, from over 1,600 in 1992 to the 419 in 2019. And the two largest merger waves took place in 1994. This was still during this voluntary phase. And then in 1999, when the Saxon state forced municipalities, the remaining municipalities, to merge. And as you can see, after that, there was relatively little merging activity actually in the Saxon municipalities. Then I want to tell you a bit more about fiscal equalization in my setting. So fiscal equalization means that the Saxon state redistributes revenues to its municipalities, because actually the Saxon state has to make sure that the local authorities are able to perform their duties. Municipalities can raise taxes on their own, but the fiscal equalization transfers are actually an important source of revenues for the local level. So they make up around 18% of the local revenues and are roughly 248 euros per capita yearly. And generally, these funds are redistributed in the form of general key allocations, and they are unrestricted funds. So the municipalities, the majority of these transfers can be used as the municipalities see fit. And these transfers are distributed via a lump sum formula, which I show you basically here. So the standardized fiscal need of a municipality is compared with its tax capacity. And if this comparison results into a shortfall, 75%, the equalization ratio here of the shortfall is made up by transfers. So I guess it's pretty standard for a fiscal equalization system, although the specifics might vary over different countries. But the main point here to notice is that the fiscal need depends crucially on the population count. So the inhabitants of a municipality determine its fiscal need. And the number of inhabitants is multiplied with a scaling factor and then a basic lump sum amount to determine the fiscal need. And the scaling factor is actually crucial in the setting here because the scaling factor increases with the population size. So larger municipalities, ceteris paribus, receive more per capita transfers. So everything else equal, of course, but this is exactly also where a potential incentive could come in for municipalities to merge. Because obviously, if by merging municipalities could reach higher population brackets, they could receive more per capita transfers via the equalization system. And this relationship has actually changed over the years until 1998. It was determined by a step function until Saxony then switched to this more common linear progressive system, as I show you here. In the empirical analysis, I start with simple difference and differences estimations. So I regress different revenue and expenditure categories. They are all used in log per capita terms on the main explanatory variable of interest, which is the treatment indicator. And this is already coded as an interaction. It equals 1 in the years after the first merger of a municipality I. So municipalities could also merge several times, but the treatment is coded here as to equal 1 after its first merger. And then I also include different control variables, which I will explain in a second, but every specification also controls for municipality-specific fixed effects and year fixed effects. And the identifying variation in the setting comes from within group variation over time. Here's the first set of results. So this shows the effect of mergers on fiscal transfers per capita. And when moving from the first to the fourth column, the specifications get consecutively more rigorous, as you can see here, as I indicate the control variables that are included. First, I only start with the baseline where municipality and year fixed effects are included. Then I include control variables like population density, the share of young and old. And then I also include additionally a municipality-specific linear time trend to account for the fact that municipalities might follow different revenue trajectories. And finally, I also include the number of pupils by different school types, but also the net inflow of people to control for population dynamics. And the pupils are actually another determinant of the fiscal need. However, in this last column, the sample is then restricted to years after 1995 due to data availability. So everything else is from 1992 until 2010, and this year, this fourth column starts in 1995. And most importantly, as you can see, the treatment effect on fiscal transfers is consistently estimated across all 4 specifications. The treatment effect amounts around 11%, and it's statistically significant and pretty stable across the different specifications. So on average, merging municipalities compared to those municipalities that never merged receive 11% in additional fiscal transfers per capita per year. So if you compare it against the average value I've told you earlier, then a merger results into an estimated gain of 70 euros per capita in transfer payments, which is quite sizable. What is more, this effect is also persistent over time. So here I show you event study estimations where I re-estimate the specification of column 3 I've just shown you with year-specific treatment effects. And even up to 5 years after the first merger, the merged municipalities still exhibit a permanent shift in their transfer level. So large-scale merger reforms, as the one in Saxony, actually have considerable redistributive effects on fiscal equalization transfers. In the next step, I look at the expenditure side. So what happens on the expenditure side of municipalities after a merger? The model specifications I show here actually correspond to the ones of the first table. So consecutively adding more control variables. And as you can see, results here are a bit less clear cut. So although we have some statistically significant effects, the effects vary a bit across specifications, although they remain constant in the sign. But this already hints at some heterogeneity in the sample that I will look at in the next section. Nevertheless, there seems to be some evidence that total administrative expenditures decrease after a merger, and this is what actually the large part of the literature has also investigated when they investigate cost advantages. There is some evidence that debt expenditures decrease and also other capital expenditures. However, also in this setting, for the expenditure variables, we have to make sure that treatment and control group are comparable already in the pre-treatment period. And this is why I show you the event study estimations also for a selected variables in this graph. And this shows that actually for capital grants and also for debt expenditures,
Lucia, you have just 2 minutes to wind up.
Yeah, I will be brief. That already here, the pre-trends do not look so nicely, so results should be interpreted with caution, actually. In the next step, I look at heterogeneity, distinguishing first of all between voluntary and compulsory mergers. And here you see some interesting patterns, basically that total administrative expenditures and this negative effect that I've just shown you is driven by the voluntary merger wave. Staff expenditures seem to increase after compulsory mergers, and building expenditures seem to increase after compulsory mergers. Again, for debt and these grant variables, we just saw that pre-trends do not look so nicely, so I have to be a bit careful with interpreting these results. And actually here, these results are confirmed. I focus here just on the largest compulsory merger wave in 1999 and largest voluntary merger wave in 1994. And again, the signs and the size of the effects are quite comparable to the table I've just shown you. Finally, then, and before I wrap up, I also looked at expenditures by different policy areas, and also here, not much is going on in the area of building, public safety, schools, or social expenditures, with the exception of the administration. This is the key area where you would also maybe expect the mergers to have the largest effects. So again, we have a slightly positive effect on staff, a negative effect on operating, that is material expenditures, which kind of is in line with the evidence that I've just shown you for the different merger waves. Then to wrap up, so the first part I've not shown you today, but is in the paper. I also look at whether fiscal variables can incentivize voluntary mergers, which is not the case in my setting. However, the effect of mergers on transfers within the equalization scheme is quite strong and positive, and moreover, also persistent. So the redistributive effects are quite sizable. For municipal expenditures, I only find moderate cost benefits after mergers. The effects are larger during the early voluntary reform wave. Staff expenditures seem to increase, which is maybe a bit of a puzzling result, especially after compulsory mergers, and operating costs seem to decrease after mergers. And let me stop here. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to get your comments.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very, very lucid presentation. Before I request Dr. Delak, the participants, if anybody have any questions on the paper, can you please type in the chat box? As and when we have time, we will read it out, those questions. Now over to Dr. Delak. You're muted, I guess. No, you are muted.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello from Turkey. I am the discussant of this paper, this beautiful paper. Almost 20 days ago, I received this paper, and it was very good. I read 2 times this paper, and then I realized that it is the research question is quite clear and very good, well written, and it is very timely. Nice research question, but there are some issues. Of course, immediately I understood that it was a PhD topic, definitely a PhD student's well-written subject, and it is very well-written and very easy to read, to follow the next step. After all these beautiful parts, I would like to just, maybe old-fashioned I am, maybe still I'm thinking certain things, but after reading your research question that, for example, what are the consequences of encompassing territorial reforms on fiscal equalization transfers, I understood that it was a relation between the mergers and transfers. This is the main topic for that. Even though you were talking about the literature background and some empirical research, I looked for a good theory behind of that. Yes, you are talking about expenditure, you are talking about fiscal issues, but are you looking at from the public sector economics? Are you looking at from the welfare economics? Are you looking for from another perspective, but theoretical? Because all those findings should either support one theory or criticize one theory or support another theory that may be combination couple of theories. So this is my it was my expectation to look for, but I couldn't. Yes, there were so many beautiful empirical research that you mentioned, but the mainly that from which perspective that you are looking at, from which theoretical perspective that you are looking at, and whether you're statistically significant or not, according to this theory, that was something that I was searching for. The other thing is, even though you were looking at Saxon and is German issue, the implications of findings, how can policymakers, for example, can use this theory or findings in addition to what will be the gain of that? I couldn't find. Maybe it was my mistake. Maybe I couldn't read carefully, but I was searching that if I apply the same thing to Turkey, how would I do that, for example, or France or Germany or another country? In brief, I'm not just going to expand longer and longer, and the defense is yours at the moment. Please have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to respond, Lucia?
Yeah, maybe briefly. So the points are all very well taken, actually. So on the theory part, you're right. So far, I could definitely or should definitely expand on this. I mean, the theory on the merger mainly focuses on these efficiency gains. So that's what's dominant, but I should really have a bit more theoretical background on this fiscal equalization topic. And the same holds for the implications for policymakers. So it's definitely true. I should elaborate more on this because, I mean, it's quite relevant, right? If you think about how the equalization system that you have installed in your country could potentially incentivize, but could also deter maybe mergers. I mean, depending on how the scheme is actually designed. So I don't know. Definitely, I should take a bit more effort into writing down the policy implications, because I still think it's a very relevant and also timely topic. Thank you very much for the comments.
Very interesting and lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both of you for that comments, and I think all the best for your PhD. I don't see any questions from the chat box, so can we go to the next paper? The next paper is the next paper is by Professor Delok on fiscal decentralization or centralization, a comparative study on Turkey and Argentina. I think that will be interesting. Turkey and Argentina comparison is going to be very interesting. Yeah.
The of this paper has started when I was invited to Argentina to give a lecture for a week or for 10 days. With my colleagues, I started talking about Argentina and how similar to Turkey and how very much they share some of the historical backgrounds or economic crises as well. Later, at Istanbul University, one of my students was from Argentina, and he studied MA with me. And then, of course, my intention the feelings started again to talk about Argentina. And I looked at fiscal decentralization or centralization, a comparative study between Argentina and Turkey we looked for. And the main aim of the paper is that I'm not going to take long time because the main findings are most important, but I have to talk about very brief certain things. The aim of the paper is that we are looking at the fiscal performance of both Turkey and Argentina for the last 15 years mainly, because both countries are experience very economic growth, very rapid economic growth, and then that, of course, economic growth had a big impact on social welfare. So we intended to look at from this perspective when he asked me what we can do with what we can study, especially. So it was easy to look to obtain data from both Turkey and Argentina, and then we managed to come across. And the student, I mean, that is not a very young student, middle-aged, from the same university that I was teaching, and he visited our university, and then we concentrated on this topic mainly. So mainly we are looking at different issues here that Turkey and mainly concentrated on the federalism in Argentina, and mainly the centralization and decentralization topics in both countries. And especially Turkey and Argentina, why they have been chosen? Because they have similar economic and productive structure. They have experimented similar political and economic process and crisis. They have still a long way to be considered as developed countries, but both countries have they have to provide and assure minimum public goods and services mainly. The theoretical background of this paper is that theory of fiscal decentralization, mainly that the definition of both centralization and decentralization known by everybody. There is no need to talk about that much, but behind of this decentralization issue, many economists that we can take into consideration, Tocqueville, Samuelson, T. Wood, Warren, Oates, especially Oates was the main person that I have taken into consideration. We have taken into consideration here. Brennan and Buchanan also was in my radar that I have studied them quite often, even though my PhD was especially was on public choice. So I use them quite a lot in many different aspects, especially the transfer of responsibilities from planning or maybe central government to the local government was the main issue if the decentralization are taken into consideration. The odds, especially the fiscal decentralization politics, mainly look at the preferences and needs, and especially look at the citizen welfare, and especially consider that the decentralization government always increase the citizen welfare because they will be able to know their needs and their wants more than the central government. So that idea has been taken by also public choice school under the assumption of selfish policy makers. They look at mainly from the perspective of lobbying activities and the incentives for the government officials not to especially to be elected or to take the role in the bureaucracy that lead all this government to be able to help the private markets that mainly focus on this issue, the decentralization idea. What is the originality of the study? Of course, each article, each study should have some originality. Our contribution, I'm not saying that it's a huge, but the idea was to compare and to find something different, which, as you know, everybody, that Human Development Index is not something new, but we compare regional Human Development Index issue with fiscal resource allocation for both countries. When we say that regional Human Development Index, of course, we are talking about 2 countries, but divided by many regions. And Turkey, for example, 12 regions, and Argentina, 6 regions. And then for each regions, we have calculated the Human Development Index that at the end made the whole country's Human Development Index for 12 regions for Turkey, 6 regions for Argentina. Then we use a panel data for fiscal resource allocation. So I'm just going to continue a bit more to come to the stage of that, which I also mentioned about this part. As you can see on 2 tables, regions and provinces of Turkey and regions and provinces for Argentina. Excuse me. We divided, especially Istanbul was a special place and the biggest place in Turkey, of course, and there are so many activities, welfare effects also. So we have taken Istanbul as one of the regions, and then of course 6 other regions in Argentina together with that. After we calculated, as you know, that Human Development Index has been done in 1990, first of all, and to be able to measure the welfare effect of countries, and based on 3 variables, which are the years of education, life expectancy, income per capita. For each regions, 12 regions in Turkey, 6 regions in Argentina, we calculated regional Human Development Index, and then we came to the result that the whole the Human Development Index we obtained as follows, that this was the whole Human Development Index for the whole country. So we came that shape. For Turkey, regional development and Human Development Index for Turkey evolution. Okay. Cross-sectional unit and T for the time period as a matter of convention. We will let I donate the cross-section identifier and T the time identifier. From here, the N cross-sectional units or observations and the maximum of T time period has been calculated. Error components has been unobservable effect, and from here, UI represent, especially here, that differ between the study unit, but they not on time, usually associated with the embedded technology. No measurable effect VT is that especially the error issue. VIT refers to purely random error here in that equation. Regional Development Index, after that, when we after we calculated the Regional Development Index LNHDI 1 year before because we had to use as a leg, T minus 1 is T region in a year. And so many tests we have done. I'm just summarizing some of them. H0 as a random effect model is appropriate. H1 fixed effect model is appropriate. And it has been found that according to Hesman test model for the case of Turkey, that the random effect model is the appropriate one for Turkey. And then especially the fixed effect one is for the Argentina. These are the results of Hesman test Turkey and Hesman test for Argentina. The random effect model and especially Hesman, the fixed effect one has been done for both countries. Then the outcome of the model is that we can conclude that instead of our incomplete model because of the low square and Darboux-Watson statistic, the regional HDI from 1 year before is considered when the central government has to allocate resources to lower government levels here. And then for each country, of course, that we have to find out. And now is that finally the outcome model has been calculated for Turkey is that, and the constant is the 23.07 and the log HDI is the 3.32. According to here, the D1 and DI is for 1 if it is equal to 1 for observations of region I, and DI if equal to 0 in a different case that has been done. This is exactly the same thing has been done for Argentina. The final data model is that for Argentina has been calculated for both constant and for the whole model is that is similar constant rate, but the regional human development index is much higher coefficients than Turkey. So the whole two models, very summary, very basic one is that, of course, that when we have that, showing that the outcome of the model at the end, supporting the idea of that, the social welfare indexes determine the fiscal resource allocation in the federal system, such as Argentina, during the period analyzed from 2000 to 2015. But the social welfare indexes do not determine the fiscal resource allocation in the central system, such as Turkey, during the period analyzed from 2000 to 2015. And from here, the final comments, we can say that in Argentinian case, the jointly work between the central government and the local government in the federal system can moderate market failures and reduce inequalities so individuals and firms can participate in the benefits of competitive economy. In Turkish case is that of Turkey that during the analyzed period between 2000 and 2015, and the jointly work between the different level of government cannot assure equal opportunities, so the market's failures may exclude agents from the competitive economy benefits, because Turkey represent mainly the centralized government system, but the Argentina represent mainly decentralized government system. So maybe the fastest is the best, short is the sweetest thing that finalize, because I'm not adding something extraordinary, original, something to the literature, but the calculation of regional human development index was our contribution. We consider that required sharing with you and doing this research. Of course, this research in just maybe 6-7 minutes I presented, but it took 7-8 months for us to collect all the data for both countries and to come to calculation. We have done many other tests, but these are the simplest version of the paper of this way. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Dulak. Ended in exactly 15 minutes, and there was some technical issue. I don't know for others, but from my side there were some technical issues. I could not hear some of the presentation, but now let me request Mr. Mohammad Shamir to give his discussion comments.
Okay, am I audible?
Yeah. Professor Dulak, can you stop this sharing? So you go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, Mohammed, I am listening.
you. Okay, I think you all can see my window as well. Okay. So thank you, Professor Dilek, for your presentation, and I have some questions also regarding your paper. So I think I'm not a person to comment on your paper because I'm just a research scholar and you're a professor. So the comment on fiscal decentralization or centralization, a comparative study on Turkey and Argentina, and they come up with I would like to point out 4 things that I would like to ask why Turkey and Argentina, and she also gave the justification for that. I think we also can see from the book of Ray Dalio, the big debt crisis, and also from the recent World Economic Outlook or IMF, that they all combinedly considering the case of Argentina and Turkey as a fragile emerging countries, and they face the currency depreciation against the US dollar, and also they expect and predict a rebound in Turkey and Argentina. So and she come up with the idea that comparing regional human development index with the fiscal resource allocation, and shows differently how the social welfare indexes determine fiscal resource allocation in Argentina, but not in Turkey. That's a conclusion in which we can see. And she took fiscal as a proxy for fiscal decentralization. She took professor took that fiscal resource allocation. I just want the justification. How much you can justify that this can be taken as a proxy for fiscal decentralization. And also she mentioned many theoretical the explanation from 1960s and 70s on. But I would like to also know what the new studies on this decentralization on Argentina or centralization issues of Turkey says. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very much, Mohammed.
The part of the question that Argentina, Turkey, I answer in 5 or 6 headings. I believe that they are satisfactory, as you mentioned. And yes, comparing regional human development index with fiscal resource allocation was the proxies for both of us. For supply demand side, we looked at human development index. For supply side, mainly we looked at the fiscal resource allocation, and to be able to measure for both countries. Justification of proxy for fiscal decentralization. Yes, there are so many proxies, of course, to be able to measure mainly the fiscal decentralization issue. But for both countries, mainly the obtaining data is a bit difficult part of the story. So we consider that these data, the fiscal decentralization, the proxy for the fiscal decentralization, the issue was the easiest for us to be able to find, because there were some intricacies, there were some issues not to find the continuous data. And then we managed to find from local governments and mainly the statistical institution for both countries. That was the data. I'm not saying that this is the only data or proxy, but this is the one that we managed to find for both countries, because as I mentioned that before, both countries are developing countries, still emerging economies, are not, the statistical data can be found for 20, 30, 40, 50 years very easily, cannot be that. And it was the main, especially from 2000 to 2015, that was the continuous data that we managed to find. There are so many, yes, after that we looked at some studies. Of course, there are some studies, but not many of them mainly compare this. We could, I mean, in 2020, in 2019, I searched the literature that I couldn't manage other proxies that has been used or have been used in their studies. So I looked at many different newspaper, mainly the journals and others, books and others. But as I mentioned that, not many new studies that use better proxies for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. If there are any questions from the audience? If not, I have a small query, Professor. Yes, I think you have done this HDI and trying to map the fiscal resource allocation between these two. But I think what is more important is the causality between these two. Now, is there an effort to really understand what is the causality between these two? Because in India, I think the causality runs from both the sides. There is a bidirectional causality. Now, have you looked at that particular component issue in Turkey as well as in Argentina?
Yes, we looked at all the for this one. And for Turkey, we looked at and we find that from fiscal data to human development index welfare proxy, that there is a one way, and for continental ways.
Okay. So there is no other conditions where this causality runs to these two concepts, like I mean, many of us argue that just allocation alone is not sufficient enough to really improve the human development. There are other control variables. I mean, like for example, governance issues or other initial conditions. There are many things. So I think maybe some discussion on that control variables may be useful for your paper. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I don't see. Okay.
We will.
Thank you so much. So let us go for the third paper. That is the political budget cycle evidence from Indian municipal corporation elections by Mohammed Shamir.
Okay, thank you, sir. And good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for saying good afternoon. I'm in India. That's right. So this is my part of my PhD topic, that the political budget cycle evidence from Indian municipal corporation elections. And I would like to get much inputs from this presentation also. So as a crux of this idea, that we can say that in a democracy, the government always acts so as to maximize the number of votes it will receive. In effect, it is an entrepreneur selling policies for votes instead of products for money. It's words from famous political scientist Anthony Downs. So he treated the government as an entrepreneur selling policies for votes. Sorry, this is not moving. Okay. So the theoretically speaking, the term political budget cycle generally refers to increases in government spending or in the deficit, or decreases in the excess, sometimes the combination of both, in an election year or pre-election year, which are perceived as motivated by the incumbent's desire for re-election. So there are much theoretical background for this. So some issues with my, sorry. Okay. William Northus was the first to formalize in an analytical framework the idea that cause of macroeconomic variables influence purely political consideration. The literature on political cycles that far as focused on the national level election and based on the easier to manipulate fiscal and monetary policy to affect the perception of the mass of voters. At subnational levels, interest group, subnational levels mean states or the local bodies level, interest groups may be better organized or voters may be better informed or more vigilant. And evaluating the candidates on real and micro indicators performance, thus providing greater incentive to incumbents to improve performances. So more recent generation of scholars, they have turned away from economic aggregates to policy instruments as the main dependent variable. So the gradual metamorphosis of political business cycle into political budget cycle in empirical research starting from early 1990s. The empirical gist of this change in the research paradigm is that while real economic variables show very weak co-movement with the electoral cycle, there is considerable evidence that fiscal shows a systematic changes before elections. So let's look at some important review based on this political budget cycle and business cycle. I will skip many slides in review part. So it's the first one, the political business cycle by the William Northus, and he treated economy is described by a Phillips curve and treating politicians as an opportunist and voters with a negative behavior, and they are retrospective. And the second one, the contribution from the Hibbs, that is partisan theory, and in which they says that the left-wing parties attribute a higher cost to unemployment related to inflation than right-wing parties. So then comes up the political-economic models, in which the assumption on politicians as more office motivated and partisan theory, and non-rational behavior and rational behavior of the economic agents. And we have some interesting study. I will skip all these, and these are just the empirical studies on some OECD countries and African countries in which which showing the theoretical background on. And the Brendan and Reason, who took the level taking the age of democracies and relating to the political cycle creation, and we have much studies on which the political budget cycle in different national levels. And, manipulative actions of government is working. So these are the Indian some studies like R. Chowdhury, who comes with who addressed the political surfing, in which when the government favorable call election, they will call for election at that time. And Lalwani and Khemani, they interested. The Lalwani paper is on parliamentary election, and Khemani on subnational, that's the state level elections. And some local level governments, the studies are here. I will skip all these, and some there exists a politics in the provision of public goods local level, in the generation of local employment, in approving pollutant industry license, and even in article about local political scams. These all are the electoral cycles in part of a non-budgetary variable. And the institutional background to this, we all know that the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, which laid down the functions to urban local bodies, and we are interested in the case of municipal corporation. Our study is focused on larger urban areas, that's a municipal corporation, and the State Finance Commission are meant to review the fiscal position of urban local bodies, and in statutorily, they don't have the fiscal in which that's the institutional constraint on them. And we have the accounting system, which is commenced in 2004, NMAM report. The objective of this is to trace the presence of budget cycle in Indian municipal corporation. And I will go to the description of data. Budget data for 34 municipal corporations were taken from the 30 official websites. Data were collected from municipal corporation with the largest population from each of the states or union territories in availability of data as per Census 2011. The date and time of election periods were collected from the respective state election commission websites. Instead of taking budget allocation, we took actual amount that's spent to each policy instrument that we are considering. The data set for the present study spans for 2005 to 5-6 to 2018-19. So it is also customary to speak which fiscal year is taken as an election year. I think this table is visible. The first column is about name of municipal corporation, and second one is the date of election, and which financial year is recorded as election year is plotted in the third column. The methodology which is taken, the framework adopted from Brendan and Reason, and with the panel observation of these are our variables in considering: revenue expenditure, capital expenditure, revenue receipts, capital receipts, tax revenue, and funds for welfare grants and infrastructure. This welfare grants we added in by adding the expenses and for welfare schemes and grants and contribution. This the funds are the fund allocated for the construction of roads and bridges. So for initial analysis, we the basic model of a political budget cycle are of the following form: log of FIT, where FIT is a fiscal indicator like the capital expenditure or revenue receipts, etc. In municipal corporation, I in the year T. XIT is a vector of control variable which includes the state domestic product, population in municipal corporation, and transfers as control variables. And we are interested in the beta 1, that's the election dummy, in which taken value 1 in the election year and 0 otherwise. And Using country fixed effects in an OLX regression with a lagged dependent variable introduce a potential estimation of bias in which. So that's why we using a GMM, system GMM estimator as a main estimator. And we shows the baseline result of the presence of a political budget cycle by taking each fiscal variable in considering we can see a significantly positive effect of election on capital expenditure. The expenditure part of a municipal corporation are showing a the excessive fund utilization in welfare schemes on verge of election is a clear-cut evidence of a visibility approach of incumbents to earn votes. So these are our results. That's the first one is capital expenditure. We have to see the beta one stands for the election dummy, which the capital expenditure includes work in progress, fixed assets, specific grants and contribution, in which shows a 0.10 point percentage increase at the election year than the non-election year. So it's a evidence for a political budget cycle in Indian Municipal Corporation. And considering the revenue expenditure, which includes the operation and maintenance expenses, administrative establishment and the program expenditures, revenue grants expenditures, etc., which shows a positive sign in which the expenditure of revenue part, which increases at the election period than the non-election year. So welfare fund, which we comprises the fund for welfare schemes, revenue grants and contributions of municipal corporations and their program expenses, and which is also highly significant in which shows a 0.42 point percentage increase at the election year than the non-election years. And in case of infrastructure, we couldn't find a significant result for that, but this sign of coefficient is deals with the political budget cycle, but we cannot interpret a result from insignificant result. So in capital receipts also, we couldn't find a significant result, but the sign for the receipts should be decline at the time of election year, but we have no significant result. But I think the capital receipts, which is 80% of which is grants from the state and central share, and also loans from bank and other institutions. So there is no chance of municipal corporation to manipulate at the time of election in this variable, that capital receipts. And in case of revenue receipts, we have a significant result in which there is a 0.026 point percentage decline at the time of election in revenue receipts, which comprises of tax and non-tax revenues, like non-tax revenues like rental income, usage charges, revenue, grants, and interest rates. So the tax revenue, which comprises of property tax, profession tax, entertainment tax, etc., shows a significant result in which there is a negative sign for the coefficient, in which there is a 0.05 point percentage decline in election year than the non-election year. So using data from Indian Municipal Corporation, we intend to contribute the presence of politically motivated spending when they are statutorily not allowed to have deficit in budget. The visible spending, in which visible spending that's visible in welfare funds, that specific and significant decrease of revenues except the capital receipt. We already mentioned that the capital receipts are mostly covered with specific grants and contribution from MLAs and MPs fund, and recommendation from the state finance commissions and the central share. So these results are consistent with the expenditure part of classical hypothesis of Tufte in 1978, and also consistent with the visibility hypothesis. That's a visible item that we have the welfare funds. So the incumbents are providing much concentration on this visible expenditure, and there is no significant result for targetability hypothesis. Thus, targetable policy instrument is the infrastructure in which we comprises both the road and bridges construction. And the Indian Municipal Corporation created a welfare and infrastructure cycle to gain attention from voters and spend excessively on expenditure instruments on verge of elections. So thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. There's an echo. I don't know. So for discussants, I think there are two names have been specified. I don't know who is going to discuss this paper. Shika Dahiya or Aditi Pathak?
Hello to everybody. This is Shikha.
Yeah.
And I think first of all, I'd like to congratulate Mohammed Shamir for this wonderful paper. I think the way he has shown the political cycles related with the budget and the impact that it has, both in terms of revenues and expenditure, I think it's commendable, especially because he has done it for like municipal corporations, where I think the data is sort of a challenging thing. And while my colleague, I think, will speak more on the data part of it, I just have like one small comment to make for Mohammed Shamir, and which is like, I was wondering that while he has shown that during the year of an election, the expenditures go significantly up and receipts go down. Do you, by any chance, came across any theoretical or empirical evidence showing about the stickiness of this change in behavior? What I mean to say is that the changes in the pattern that you have observed, is it there to stay after the election year? Or I know this is like slightly outside the ambit of the paper, but if you could just throw in some light, I think that can be really helpful. Otherwise, I think the paper was pretty commendable. I'll ask my colleague to also substantiate with her comments, and then I think you can respond.
Thank you,
Okay,
Shikha.
thank you. Oh, okay.
Yes, sir. So I reiterate what Shikha has said, that the data part of municipalities is quite a challenging task, and I really want to congratulate you on the fact that you have collated data from 2006 to 2018 based on the election years. My two doubts basically. So have you incorporated that or not? I just wanted to ask that. So NMAM came in 2004. However, the states implemented it in a different manner. So there are many states which have implemented it like 3 to 4 years back or 4 to 5 years back. So there has been a time lag. So I just wanted to ask that whether taking the data from 2006 to 2018, have you incorporated that the budget incorporated across the municipalities are comparable? Secondly, I just wanted to ask that you have taken the municipalities, 34 municipalities, which has the highest population in each state or each UT. But my doubt is, like in a state like Maharashtra, where you have a million plus municipality, and there might be some other states which the population catered by the state will be very by the particular municipality would be very less, suppose in a northeast state. So wouldn't it be desirable to actually segregate the municipalities based on some kind of a population parameters, because the revenue and the expenditure demands are varied across municipalities, and it also depends on what functions and functionalities are being transferred to the third tier based on the 18 functions enshrined. So in your model, have you somewhere incorporated some aspect of that, because that will also determine that what kind of an expenditure, how much reduction here is back the municipality based on the population. Two options.
Thank you. Mohammed, would you like to respond?
Yeah, thanks for those comments. And this is a hideous task to get budgetary data for municipal corporation, in which we have no single repository for this data. And the first comment that would I see a changes in pattern, in which there are theoretical background in which the revenue part will increase after the election. The post-election period, there will be an increase in revenue, and this manipulative characteristics that's happened at the time of election. So they see these policy instruments as a tool for political gain. So, and second thing, that's 2005 to 2018-19, and she mentioned that the accounts comes 2004 and many states which are adopted different times. So first of all, this is an unbalanced panel in which some municipal corporations from 2006 to 2018-19 and some from in between 2010 to 2018, like that. And also I would I'm really thankful to that comment that is segregation of municipal corporation based on their population, like a big, like she mentioned that Mumbai municipal corporation will be a big in population and fiscal autonomy, and also the Panaji, like a Goa municipal corporation, that Panaji will be a small in character. So I think that will be considered in my future research. Thank you.
Thank you all the three for that very nice presentation. Mohammed, the only small suggestion is that there are some studies on political budget cycles done by NIPFP staff also. I think you may need to cover more Indian studies. I think that will be more useful for your. I think it's part of your thesis, so it will be very useful if you can have up-to-date references, especially from Indian context. So we'll go to the.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So we'll go to the fourth paper, Health Dynamics in India and Empowerment of Local Bodies. This is from the Ministry of Finance. Yeah.
So our paper is on health dynamics in India and empowerment of local bodies. It's been jointly written by myself and my colleague Aditi Pathak. We are currently with Ministry of Finance. This will be the flow of our presentation, and our paper can clearly be divided into two parts. The first one is on the health dynamics in India, where we have tried to show the public spending, the shortfalls in health infrastructure, the health outcomes, etc. And the other part will be on the role of third tier of governance in India, which is local bodies, and how it might significantly impact the health outcomes in India. So coming to the first slide, before I start, I think I would like to say that, well, since independence, I think India has made a lot of progress in terms of life expectancy, fertility, and in eradication of a number of diseases. However, if you compare it on this date with a number of similarly placed economies and with our neighbors, I think we have to do a lot of tasks in terms of improving our life expectancy, and more so in terms of under 5 mortality rate, maternal mortality rate.
Excuse me, Shikha, is it for which year is this? This data is for which year?
So this will be, it's like slightly different for like different countries, but it will range between 2015 to the present 2019.
For India?
For India, so for example, the fertility rate we have taken is from 2011, and so for different indicators it is different. So nutritional outcomes will be the NFHS data, which came in 2015-16. So like that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And in fact, life expectancy is from the SRS, so it's 69. So that ways. Coming to the interstate disparities in health outcomes, what we wanted to show here was that, while the averages are at a certain number, but there is a lot of divergence between states. For example, in Nagaland, the IMR will be somewhere at 4, and while in a state like Madhya Pradesh, it's at 48, which is like very high. Similarly, in terms of total fertility rate, we have states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala, which is like which can be compared to advanced economies, which are at 1.59 and 1.79 respectively, while we also have Bihar and UP, which are very high at 2.93 and 2.61. The graph on the left-hand side shows that there's a lot of variation, especially in terms of IMR, in terms of institutional delivery. So that's that on the left panel. In this particular this particular slide, what we have tried to show is that the sort of a vulnerability of states, because we have tried to plot the number of human resource for health and hospital beds per 1,000 people, and we have tried to see that which states are kind of lagging behind both in terms of both these indicators. We see that there are states like Rajasthan, UP, Assam, Odisha, MP, Jharkhand, and Bihar who have both low number of human resources for health as well as hospital beds. In terms of number of doctors and nurses, one doctor in India is catering to about 1,500 people, and one nurse in India is catering to about 670 people, which is like very different from what WHO standards have prescribed, like 1:1,000 for doctors and 1:300 for nurses. Coming to the next slide, this slide shows the public spending on health in India. On the first chart, we can see in year 2018-19, we were somewhere at 0.96% of GDP only. That is like we are still below 1%. On the right-hand side graph, we can see the last bar shows that about 30% of this total expenditure is being undertaken by center and about 70% by states. And that makes sense for India because health is a state subject. The table on the left-hand side in the bottom panel shows a comparison of the national health policy targets and where we are standing currently. While the national health policy prescribes that our public health expenditure on health should be 2.5% of GDP and it should be increased to that level by 2025, we are somewhere at 0.96%. In terms of state health spending, it prescribes that states should have at least 8% of their budget spending should be spent on health sector, while we are at somewhere 5.18% in terms of an average. And while we were looking at this data in 2018-19, I think only Meghalaya was a state which crossed the 8% mark. Primary health expenditure should be like 2/3 of the total health expenditure because that is something that takes care of a lot of secondary and tertiary health needs. However, India is at about 53%. While the concerns are more because in terms of per capita expenditure, the variation is very high when we look at the per capita health expenditure. So it's like 616 for Kerala and 616 for Bihar and 2,000 for Kerala. And if we look at Northeastern and Himalayan state, it is about 10 times of what was in Bihar. So it's like 6,937 for Arunachal Pradesh. Here we have just tried to show a divergence from 2011-12 to 2018-19 of states who were like at the bottom of the health spending and the states who were at the top of the health spending. Here we have tried to keep the Northeastern and Himalayan states separate because those states are sort of different, have a lot of cost disability factors, have dispersed population, so cannot be directly compared with the other big states in the country. So it shows that the divergence in the health expenditure is increasing over time. This can also be seen in terms of standard deviation. Now I'll ask Aditi to just take up the decentralization part from here.
So the second part of the paper is actually talking about the decentralization's impact on the health outcomes. We are dividing this slide into three bases. That first is a theoretical base, which gives the decentralization theorem, which actually says that the local needs are felt. So the local information can, so local bodies have access to better information about local circumstances than the central authorities. So we can get better results by empowering the local bodies further. India has a huge constitutional base based on the local bodies also. We have over 2.6 lakh panchayats, which are and the bases actually find in the constitution after 73rd and 74th amendment, which actually empowered the local bodies and brought out a 11th and a 12th schedule, which actually gave them the power. But still the state plays a key role in actually transferring these functions to the local bodies. So there are 29 functions which are enshrined for the rural local bodies and 18 functions for the for urban local bodies. However, if we see the pattern, states like Kerala, Karnataka, and Sikkim have performed really well in transferring the functions. But some states like Manipur, Punjab, Tripura have been the laggard states and not done so much at this level. Why we talk about health and local bodies is because health and sanitation is one of the functions which is enshrined in both the 11th as well as 12th schedule. And if these local bodies are empowered, can they give better results in terms of health and safety is what our study is about. We also have an international experience based on this. So on the papers that we have read. So if we talk about the OECD countries, health and education have been effectively decentralized to the subnational governments. And it has also been proven in many of the papers that more decentralization tends to better service delivery as policymakers are closer to the people they are serving. And there is also an empirical evidence that Argentina's plan in NACER, which involves city government receiving from the National Health Ministry based on population coverage, has led to positive effects on the health outcomes. So this is the theoretical base. And Shikha has discussed about the health outcomes. The next slide would be the results, the methodology and the results. So our analysis is based on the 21 states, and we have excluded the northeastern states and Goa because of the outliers they are. And we have also included the erstwhile state Jammu and Kashmir. Our regression results are very simple and straightforward. So we have actually carried on the devolution index, which is published by the Panchayati Raj for rural bodies. So we have the dependent variable to be rural and rural under 5 mortality rate. We have tried to regress it on the per capita GDP. So all indicators are taken in log form. So this per capita GST, per capita revenue expenditure on health, per capita capital expenditure on health. Then there is a shortfall in an infrastructure index, which we have created from the rural statistics of 2018-19, which actually tells us that how much shortfall are there in the primary health centers, the centers and the CSCs and the community health centers. Index of is Municipal Panchayati Raj Index, which actually higher is so it is a rate between higher value, higher is the devolution of the functions. So this simple regression, what significant were two variables were and that per capita revenue expenditure on health, and was the incentive. What is the article below, which is showing that shortfall is highly correlated with the per capita expenditure. So we also I think the problem. Yeah. So this is the results interpretation. I think it is pretty small, so it is. I hope it is visible. So we have divided our results into two parts. So result one is saying, so when we bifurcate the per capita health expenditure, it can be divided into per capita revenue and per capita capital expenditure. Per capita, so in a state's expenditure, 90% of the state health expenditure is revenue expenditure. And this mostly comprises of the salary and wages or building on the existing structures which are already in place. So there is a strong negative correlation between per capita revenue expenditure and also the shortfall in health infrastructure. From our results, we have actually proved that per capita revenue expenditure is a significant indicator which determines better health across states. So we think that per capita revenue health expenditure should always need to supplement and not substitute with the capital health expenditure. Second result is straightforward. We found out that the devolution index across states is quite a significant variable when it comes to determine few health parameters that we have taken. So in a state like India, which is actually governed by like 2.6 lakh panchayats, we have a sub-center at every panchayat. So, and we have also seen that there is a high correlation between a population per panchayat and a sub-center. So for us, for states like West Bengal, Kerala, which has more than 10,000 population per panchayat, if we can actually build upon this model and use the existing infrastructure in place in kind of the third tier, or the existing infrastructure in place in the form of the local bodies, and devolve the function of health there, we can actually get fruitful result. And also these states are highly fiscally stressed, and given the COVID pandemic and the large expenditure on health, this if we actually materialize this revolution on the basis of the decentralization, and we can actually get fruitful result across the states. The diagrams on the right hand side are just a representation of what we have found in the results. So these are eastern states, northern states, southern and western. Where all the devolution index is higher, we have better parameters of rural infant mortality rate and under 5 mortality rate. Next slide. So this is so what we have done is we have actually carried out a simulation exercise based on the two parameters that we have found significant. And if we change one parameter, taking every other parameter to be constant, what we are able to find here is that in between the two parameters, if we change the devolution index, there is more impact on the health parameters of infant mortality rate and under 5 mortality rate as compared to the revenue expenditure on health, which is further reiterating our point that there needs to be a decentralization in the health budget and health services. Next slide. Shikha is going to speak on
So
this.
I think our policy implications are pretty straightforward, and since there's not much time, I'll just say that I think what Aditi has already said, revenue health expenditure is crucial for functioning of public health expenditure, and there is a need to supplement it and not substitute it for capital health expenditure, because a lot of this expenditure goes into the salaries of the health workers and medicines and equipment. The other thing is about the index of decentralization and what we want to say here is that the more empowered the local bodies are in terms of funds, functions, and functionaries, I think the implementation of various policies at the ground level can be better, and what we have tried to show here is that the health outcomes are better in such states. A good example is that of Kerala, which has shown itself to be an example where local governments and the staff of public health institutions can play a very important role in the effective delivery of health services. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Shikha, Aditi, for this very nice presentation and very interesting presentation. Can I request the discussant, Lucia?
Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. So first of all, I quite enjoyed reading the paper, and I definitely learned a lot. Not being an health economist and not being particularly familiar with India or its institutions. So thank you that or for providing me the opportunity to read the paper. Well, I'll directly dive into the major points. So first on the descriptive part, so on the first part of the paper, it would be well, depending very much on the audience or the outlet the paper is designed for, it would be really helpful to provide some background on Indian institutions, maybe already in a separate section at the very beginning. So for me, for example, I mean, you mentioned it in the presentation now, but I'm not sure whether you wrote it down in the paper. So I didn't know, for example, that the health policy area was like a task of the states. So it would be nice to have at the beginning a bit of an explanation. What is the role maybe of the central government, of the states, versus the local levels in the distribution of primary health, for example. And then for me, with literally no background in Indian institution, for example, I also did not or do not know what a panchayat is. So is it comparable to a district? So for an international audience, it would be nice to have these kind of information somewhere in the paper at the beginning. Then I wondered on your descriptive part on the interstate variations. You described them very nicely. I wondered whether you also have like possible reasons, or whether you could argue about some possible reasons for these interstate variations. So is it because the states have like very different levels of spending regarding these health areas, or do you have some other suggestions or expectations why these states deviate so much? And then I also wondered whether you could already in the descriptive part relate your analysis a bit more to the decentralization that comes then in your empirical analysis. Specifically, I wondered whether states with a relatively high degree of decentralization have better health outcomes compared to states with a low decentralization. So maybe you could also make this link between decentralization and health indicators in the first part of the paper. And the natural question that would follow up from this is, could decentralization possibly close the gap in these health indicators? And then this descriptive and empirical analysis would also align like really, really nicely. On the empirical analysis, I wondered whether you could, I don't know, probably it has to do with data availability issues, whether you could expand the cross-section to a panel and follow the states over a certain amount of time. And then it would, I guess it could really advance your empirical analysis, because then you could also include time-fixed effects, state-fixed effects, and could control for potential unobservable variables with these fixed effects. Then I would also would have liked a bit more details on the decentralization index, on how it is calculated. I mean, I don't really know what this variable measures, and also, for example, its range. I think you said it now, it ranges between 0 and 1. Generally, it would be nice to have some descriptive summary statistics for the variables that you use in the empirical analysis. And maybe finally, and to conclude, I can also send you the discussion slides afterwards, because I wrote it all down. It would be, maybe you could also take a stance in the paper on the discussion of causality versus correlation, because I mean, the policy implications are quite strong, and it would be nice if you could have a say or discuss this issue, like causality versus correlation, in your empirical analysis. And maybe I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shika, you want to respond to those? And there's also a question from the chat box.
Thank you.
Let me also add my own query. I think, I mean, first of all, let me congratulate you for this very nice paper, very clear and crisp. But when I was looking at some of the regression results, you see signs for revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. I know capital expenditure is insignificant, but I thought the sign is more important, I think, than the significance. So especially you are also carrying some kind of simulations. When you are trying to do that simulation based on that coefficients, it makes all the more sense to have a consistent signs. So that's something that I thought point out to you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Louisa. Thank you for your very valuable comments and questions. I am sure it will help us to widen our analysis a lot. I think I noted down pretty much everything. I'll start with Louisa's question first. I think now you say it, it makes more sense to me that we should have given a lot of more information on the Indian institutions for the benefit of our foreign counterparts, because we somehow just tend to take it for granted that everyone knows it. So we'll make sure that we give more explanations about the Indian institutions, how we are a federal country, how we have 3 layers of governance, and panchayats are basically the governance institutions at the village level, and similarly municipalities are in the urban areas. I think we'll make it more clear next time. As far as your question on interstate variations and why so much of difference is there, so there are a lot of reasons for that. And I think there can be a separate paper on it, but on top of my mind, like you said, difference in spending, health spending is definitely one. Then there's a lot of difference in the governance, overall governance of the states in general. There are also historical biasness to this interstate, this thing where certain states have been having very good indicators for a very long period of time. I'm sure education also has a role to play. I think that point is well taken, and perhaps we can work further on this particular point that you have mentioned. Then the next part that you said was about expanding this to a panel. I think we fully agree there was sort of a challenge in terms of data because the decentralization index we had for 2014-15 and then 15-16. So we couldn't really expand it over a number of years. Perhaps we can try to find a proxy for this particular index and try to see how our results can be, further become more robust in that sense. Decentralization index, it's a very complex index, has a lot of indicators. It has indicators like how much funds are being devolved to states, how much power to local bodies, how much power the local bodies have in terms of taxation, how much functions have been devolved to them so that they can actually take the implementation work at the ground level. A number of such indicators. I think we should give more details of it in the paper. I completely agree with you. Your point on causality and correlation is well taken. I think that's very useful. And the last thing that I think Sir said was on the consistency of signs. I think, sir, we take that comment of yours into consideration, and we'll see how we can further work on it. Now I'll ask Aditi if she has anything to add, or in case I would have missed anything, she can perhaps substantiate.
There is also a question in the chat box. Want to have
Sorry.
a look at it? There is a question in the chat box. So.
Right, sir. 1 second.
Yeah, go ahead, Aditi. Aditi, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. So thank you for the responses. And yes, as Shikha said, that we should have actually elaborated a little more on the decentralization as well as the institutions of India, so that it is better for the international audiences. Sir, apart from that, so like the way you said, ki, there should be a so instead of a cross section, there should be a panel data. So what problem we faced in the data was the data that we used was not time consistent. So it used to come in a lag, and for data like decentralization indexes and it is released like so the last data we have is of Ministry of Panchayati year 2016, and till then after that they have not released it. So basically the lag in the data and the and not a particular frequency of data which is coming every year is causing this problem that we can't, as of now, we can't do it as a panel analysis. But yes, in the future or or we will definitely try to get some other source of data which is time consistent to make it a more robust analysis. Apart from that, yeah, you said ki why is there is a problem interstate. So interstate states have not performed well and some states have performed well. So it has been because of the policy that the states have taken over a period of time. Like there was one example that we would like to take is for the state of Kerala, which is actually, so what we have tried to what we have tried to show with the help of empirical analysis is actually postulated by Kerala long back in the year 1995, in which around 35 to 40% of the development budget was actually allocated to the local bodies. And they didn't hire any more people there. They actually took people on contract arrangements whenever they required them. And the PHCs and CSCs were so well intertwined with the third tier that all the health facilities was very well distributed at the local level. So there has been state-specific models in this sense, and some states have been laggard. But yes, there is a whole theory. This is only one example that I'm stating. But yes, there are many different reasons why states have performed differently over a period of time. And yes, sir, we will definitely look at the signs of the results and we'll get back with a analysis. And you, Shikha.
Thank you so much. I can see a question in the chat box. Regression here. What is the level of significance of these correlation figures? Aditi, if you can back me up, is it like 10%? Aditi?
We have, yeah, so we have performed ordinary least regression here. We have performed that. What is the level of significance of these correlation figures? I think you're talking about the correlation figures that we have taken in the bottom, like the second table, right?
Yeah, I think so.
That's what the question.
Yeah. So the level of significance of these correlation figures, so some of them were like 10% and some of them are like 5%. So I will not say ki it is only 10%. Some of them are 10, and one of and other ones are 5%. Was the relationship smoothly to be interpreted as such? Yes, so it was not smoothly linear. So it is a log function which is so some of the functions are log, so some of the coefficients will be slope and some of the coefficients will be treated as a rate of growth. So yes, the dependent variable was log and the other were it was kind of a log linear function.
Okay, thank you. So in fact, even in correlation, the sign matters. Okay,
yes.
I think that you need to keep in mind.
Yes.
With that, I think we are coming to the end of this session. First of all, know that I think all these papers are full papers, and I do hope that NIPFP will try to bring that as working papers. Now, if organizers have to say something at this point, is Lekha there? Amandeep, Lekha? So if not, let me thank all of you. So I'd like to end this session. Thank you. Thank you once.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.